Golden Siblings edited machine translation. 1. It all began one day with an unexpected exchange between an older sister and a younger brother. Stranger. Garf, let us go out. Stranger. Huh, stranger. Yes, let us go out. Just me and you, Garf. Stranger. Huh. The younger brother Garfield could not help his eyes from opening wide at his sister's emphatic and repeated invitation. Garfield Tinsel and Frederica Baumann, two siblings who were recently reunited after many years apart. Their reunion was a dramatic one, with the younger brother dashing in just as the older sister was about to fall into the hands of an assassin. After that, the two did not get along well enough to make up for their time apart. Rather, the superb coordination that they had achieved during that life-threatening situation did not translate to everyday life, and the awkwardness of the past 10 years continued on. It had been 1 month since the resolution of the issues surrounding the sanctuary and the Roswell mansion, bringing the residents of that closed-off place into the outside world. Garfield, one of them, was finally getting used to waking up in the morning in a room of a large mansion instead of a familiar shabby shack. However, there was a sense of tension in such a new environment, and the relationship between the siblings had not improved much. Stranger. You're siblings, so it's okay to flirt with each other like we do. Right, Biko. Stranger. Don't be so cavalier about flirting, I suppose. However, since Betty is Subaru's partner, it is essential to stick with you as much as possible, in fact. Subaru. Ha ha ha, you little cutie. But I think I'd rather take a bath alone without being watched. This was part of a conversation between Subaru and Beatrice, who entered into a contractual relationship with him at the same time as the reunion of the siblings. It was tempting to say that the two were interfering with them out of the fact that their relationship was going well. But this was surprisingly a common issue in the newly reformed Emilia camp. The entire group moved into a new mansion to replace the one that had burned down for various reasons. In an effort to restore the sibling relationship between Garfield and Frederica, they had tried various meddling schemes that had ended in failure, without ever getting beyond the realm of pranks. The relationship between the two siblings, with no signs of improvement in sight, was unexpectedly brought to a head by Frederica. Garf, let us go out. It was the sudden invitation from his sister at the very beginning. Stranger, no need to be so cautious. Frederica is probably trying to work out how to get closer to her reunited little brother. You should go. Ram understands Frederica's desire to be an older sister. When he discussed Frederica's invitation, Ram said this curtly, in her usual tone, as she folded the laundry she had brought in. Although it was curt, Ram brought the laundry basket into an appropriate room, where a girl who looked exactly like her was lying on the bed. In the room of a girl with whom Garfield and Ram had been told they had a close relationship. When Ram said she could understand Frederica's sisterly feelings, Garfield had neither the wit necessary to retort back, nor the ability to throw an ignorant tantrum. Ram, you seem dissatisfied. Don't you believe what Ram is saying? Garfield. Nah, I do. There's no one my amazin' self trusts more than ya, Ram. The only other people I trust more than Ram are Nana the captain, and well, there's not many others. Ram. Such a fool. But that is the kind of thing Ram likes about you, Garfield. Gah! Taken aback, Garfield was unsure why he was suddenly being praised. Ram never looked at him until then. She only looked at him at times like this, and her profile was so beautiful that Garfield was again captivated by his crush. Anyway, Ram, do your best, Garf. Frederica has always been concerned for you, Garf. She is Ram's senior. Ram won't feel good if you make the wrong choices. It was very Ram-like to add that. Stranger, you two get along so well, if you're too conscious of it, it'll make things awkward. Then don't overthink it and just really have some fun. Stranger, Frederica-sama is so beautiful. You are too good for Garf-san. Stranger, oh, just in time before you go out, could you please buy some more ink for my quill pen? I am almost through my supply. There was no particularly strong reason to refuse, but when he added a reason why the outing with Frederica could not be refused, it became a no-brainer on a day when she had been given a half-day off. Exaggeratedly, everyone came to see them off at the gate. Emilia, the leader of the camp, whom he was still getting acquainted with. Petra, a brusque maid whom he had only known for a short time. And Otto, whose attitude was so irritating because he did not consider this event to be of any importance and others. Then, at the end of these farewells, Subaru. Go enjoy the date alone, sister and brother. Just like me and Biko. Beatrice. Don't you take this date thing so seriously, I suppose. It's best to listen to what Subaru says half the time, not just half, but a quarter of the time, in fact. Subaru. Ha ha ha, you little rascal. But you don't have to follow me to the toilet in the middle of the night. After being seen off by Subaru and Beatrice, both of whom seemed eager to show how well their relationship was going, Garfield and Frederica departed from the Roswell mansion. That was how Garfield ended up going out with his sister. To Frederica. So Garf, when was the last time you went to Costal? Garfield. Huh. What was intended to be casual chit-chat was met with a brusque response, which Frederica thought she messed up. Although Frederica had thought she had done a lot of mental preparation for today's outing, her plan to open up a simple topic stumbled at the outset, and Frederica's plan fell apart. Immediately, words from Frederica's grandmother come to her mind. Ryuzu, Fu, this is the first time Garbo has lived away from us. I'm sure he'll have a hard time because of all the new things that he's never done before, so Fu, make sure that you help him out. This was what Frederica was requested by Ryuzu, who had been assigned to live elsewhere, to unite the sanctuary's inhabitants and her replicants. Of course, Frederica cared about Garfield not because she was asked to, but because he was her dear younger brother. But while she wanted to act like a big sister, Frederica was unsure how to do so. In any case, Frederica's blood would run cold with despair if she were to fail her grandmother's request. And just when Frederica's fangs were trembling with apprehension, Garfield, I've never been, today's my first time. Frederica, huh. Garfield, that's why I said it was my first time. Didn't you just ask me yourself, sis? Frederica, oh, yes, it is it not? Yes, this is the first time you have ever been here, even though it has been 20 days since we moved in here. This is your first time, Garfield. You're bane annoyin'. I already told you, don't keep repeatin' yourself. Frederica's behavior seemed too serious for Garfield, who was willing to talk with her. Immediately after Garfield responded warmly to Frederica's question, the mood was broken by an unexpected remark. However, it was really that surprising. Frederica, surely you had the opportunity to accompany Ram on some shopping trips. Garfield, Ram left most of the troublesome shoppin' to that lil' kid Petra, and my amazin' self was busy sentin' up de mansion. Frederica, when it comes to her, she is becoming easygoing again, and Garf is also Garf. Scenting the house is such a crude thing to do. Frederica was dismayed with Ram's apparent misconduct, and subsequently dismayed by Garfield's conduct. Certainly, it was understandable to feel uneasy about leaving one's hometown, with its familiar scents all over the place. But scenting territory was an eccentricity in the outside world. Frederica, you need to be taught some common sense in that area too. Garfield, what's wrong? Sis, your face suddenly turned pale. Frederica, nothing. I just remembered that when I left the sanctuary 10 years ago, I did the same thing at first in the mansion. Looking back on her actions, Frederica was struck by the shock that came a decade too late. At that time, Frederica, in order to cope with the loneliness of being away from her hometown, also went around scenting various places, things, and even people, patrolled her territory late into the night, and even established a hierarchical order with the surrounding animals, all of which would be considered eccentric behavior. Frederica, well, at that time, Clind, who was the head servant, disciplined me to correct it, and what a surprise. I had no idea that Garf and I were so much like sister and brother. Garfield, what you surprised about? Course it's normal for my amazin' self, and sis to be like sister and brother. Frederica trembled, and Garfield sighed as he patted her back. Garfield's words startled Frederica and said, sis, as he tilted his head. The person in question spoke casually, without any qualms. Frederica, yes, of course, it is only a natural thing to do. Garfield, gently patting her chest, Frederica smiled at Garfield. As Garfield said, it was only natural that they were like siblings. Even if they had been apart for more than a decade, there was no need to be afraid to face the fact that they were sister and brother. It was okay to be natural. To begin with, What kind of siblings required mental preparation to be a sister and brother? Frederica, grandmother, I think I can manage to fulfill my roles, Garfield. What? You've had that field bunting is still blue look on your face till now. Sis, maybe you're startin' to turn senile like Granny Ga. Frederica, I went to the trouble of complimenting you, but that was a few words too many. No, it is more than a few words if you consider your abusive words to grandmother. You should reflect on that. Garfield, why you don't have to hit me over it, you know. When Garfield received a blow to the head, Frederica hid her mouth and laughed, then took a few quick steps in front of Garfield. Frederica, come to think of it, you still have not said anything about me getting all dressed up. Garfield, huh. Frederica, do not sound so grumpy. Petra chose my outfit for today. Walking next to me is so much more refreshing than if I were in my maid uniform, right? Wearing a light cloak over her shoulders, Frederica was dressed for going out, not in her usual maid uniform. Petra, who was very knowledgeable about clothing, and at the same time had a very keen eye, chose the outfit, and Frederica was enjoying the refreshing feeling of wearing something other than her uniform for the first time in a long time. No, it should be said that she finally had the time to enjoy the experience. Garfield, I really don't care about the clothes you're wearing. Frederica, would you say the same thing if Ram were here? Garfield, Gah. Frederica, Subaru-sama told me that when a man or woman goes on a date, he or she does everything in their power to be considerate and have an enjoyable time with the other person. Although the word was unfamiliar to her, it seemed to be a common word among Subaru, Emilia, and Beatrice, while Petra was happy to say that she had a date with Subaru the other day. It was Petra's look that gave Frederica the courage to ask out Garfield. That was why Garfield, well, I guess it ain't so bad, is it? Frederica, for someone like you, Garf, you did your best. Garfield, huh? Garfield, who seemed to have tried his best to figure out the unfamiliar words, raised his voice at the assessment. Frederica enjoyed these exchanges with Garfield, thinking that this was probably the most enjoyable part of the date that Petra and the others happily told her about. 3. The industrial city of Kostal, one of the 5 great cities of the kingdom of Lugunica, was also the nearest city to the new mansion to which the Emilia camp had just moved. The previous mansion had only a small village nearby, which had made it inconvenient for various reasons, such as shopping. Therefore, although the sizes of the old and new mansions were not different, the present mansion was much more convenient. Frederica, moreover, this mansion is the Mather's main mansion, meaning that we were spending all our time in an inconvenient mansion, right? Garfield, why did they do that? Frederica, I am sure the master had profound thoughts on the matters, but the former mansion is closer to both the royal capital and the sanctuary. Garfield, that bastard flies in the air, so it really doesn't matter. When Garfield gnashed his teeth in disgust, Frederica was unable to respond. For some time now, Frederica had always been unsure of Roswell's thinking, but the events just prior to their reunion had reinforced this. Frederica could not imagine what Roswell had hoped to gain from that scheme that had backed the entire camp into a corner. However, Frederica, it is because the master is a magician. Letting the matter drop, Frederica withdrew her negative feelings toward Roswell to the back of her mind. What lay there were her honest and true feelings. For Frederica, Roswell was a magician. Not a magician as a mere profession or skill, but a magician in the sense that he was a special being that could do anything. His knowledge and skills were the solution to every problem. The main reason why Frederica left the sanctuary when she was still young was because she saw hope in what Roswell could do. That had not changed even now, after all that Roswell had done. Garfield, Tisk, I don't want to talk about that bastard Roswell. If I'm going to go out with Sis with a frown, my amazing self'll just, ooh. Frederica, WWWH, what is it, Garf? You are yelling so loud all of a sudden. Garfield, WHY, look at that. What is it, Sis, that huge buildin'? That wall. The city, saying this, an excited Garfield pointed to a distant view of the city in front of him. Garfield's previously sour expression changed, and he was astonished to see the city, Kostal, which became visible just as the forest that had blocked the view of the road was cut off. Would that not be natural? Most of the world Garfield knew was a small village called the Sanctuary. Although Garfield knew about the world, the reality of a big city was far beyond his imagination. Garfield, D-damn, I shouldn't have been wasting time sentin' up the mansion. Sis, come on, hurry up. A big ass thing, a big ass thing, and a big ass thing are waitin' for my amazin' self. Frederica. Ah, hold on, Garf, I am wearing a skirt. Do not be in such a hurry, you already are. Garf. With a childlike twinkle in his eye, Garfield hurried Frederica along. Although Frederica smiled at such a quick change of attention from the previous topic, she could not hide her anxiety toward her excited younger brother. Garfield was curious about his first visit to a big city, but the problem lay with Costul. The industrial city of Costul was the most modest of the 5 great cities. Frederica, compared to the other 5 great cities, the Watergate City, the Ground Dragon Capital, and the Mining City, there would be much more to see. There were no so-called tourist attractions in Costul. Although Garfield was willing to go out on a date, Frederica was worried that she might disappoint him once again. Frederica, please, grandmother, watch over Garf and I. It had been a while since she offered a heartfelt prayer to her faraway grandmother. Garfield, amazin'. It's even bigger when you look at it up close. It's as they say, Gassock is bigger than it sounds. Garfield's emerald green eyes widened with glee as he gazed at the building under construction. The trip to Costul started with a sense of anxiety, but despite Frederica's misgivings over the lack of delicious sweets and beautiful scenery, the city's inorganic nature seemed to be a good thing for Garfield, who simply loved big, angular things. The nature of the city was a blessing in disguise. Frederica, thank you, grandmother. Thanks to you, my date with Garf did not get ruined. If Ryuzu had heard this, she would have tilted her head in confusion for something she did not understand. But at this moment, Frederica was unconcerned. Then Garfield, pulling Frederica's sleeve as he looked around, Garfield. Hey sis, what's that? That thing looks like a big ass box. Frederica, calm down, Garf. That box is a magic creation tool, a unique product of the industrial city used all over the city. Garfield, a magic creation tool. Garf's eyes widened at the unfamiliar word, and Frederica perked up. Magic creation tools were the primary factor that contributed to the prosperity of the industrial city of Costul, and made it one of the 5 great cities. Magic stones powered magic creation tools and were capable of tasks that would be impossible to accomplish by human hands. These tools were used in Roswal's mansion to produce heat for the kitchen and boil water for the baths, and in the royal capital to create fountains, making them a major industry of Costul. Frederica, the magic creation tools work faster and more accurately than manual labor, and were introduced into factories to produce and export goods to other cities. This raised Costul's value, leading to it being called one of the 5 great cities. Unlike the other 4 cities, it is a rare example of a city that has only recently joined the 5 great cities. Garfield, really, that's amazing. Frederica, of course it is, of course it is. Garfield, why is sis so proud about this? After Frederica explained the origins of the city, Garfield grew suspicious of the glee with which Frederica explained it. Frederica opened her arms and continued, actually, in response to Garfield. Frederica, now, Garf has acknowledged magic creation tools as an amazing achievement. But what if I told you that the master's own Mather's family was involved in the creation of magic creation tools? Garfield. Frederica. Oh, my dear, what a grim face. It is not the master's achievement, but his father's, you know. Garfield. Don't talk to me about anything dealin' with that bastard Roswal. Having been explained plainly, Frederica's shoulders slumped. It was a failure. However, no matter how much Garfield disliked Roswal, the fact remained that the key to the city's success lay with his predecessor, Roswal K. Mathers. The Mathers family was instrumental in developing the industrial city of Costul, which had been why their main mansion was near Costul. Regardless, Frederica, Garf, the factory I talked about, how about a tour? Garfield. Are you sure? No, but magic creation tools are that bastard's creation, no, but it doesn't matter. When confronted with a factory producing magic creation tools of various sizes, Garfield overrode his hesitation. Without further ado, he tried to run into the factory at a brisk pace, but Garfield stopped himself just before he started. Frederica tilted her head when her brother suddenly stopped. Garfield. Sis, are you okay with this? My amazin' self is the only one who's gonna be having fun, you know. Frederica. It is okay. We will have many opportunities to come to Costul, and a date is something that is mutually considerate, and just now you were considerate of me. Garfield. Tusk, I didn't know about that, but, well, let's go. With only a moment's hesitation, Garfield rushed into the factory, full of energy. Surely he would indulge in his first visit to Costul by asking questions of the staff with that same passion. Seeing off her energetic brother, Frederica walked over to the fence outside the factory and pulled off her right boot while resting her weight on the fence. She had a new pair of boots for the date, causing her foot to chafe slightly. Frederica, it is not as bad as I thought it would be. This is, stranger. Oi, oi, that's amazing. I can't believe such a beautiful lady is so freely exposing her bare feet. While feeling relieved that the wound was not as bad as she had feared, Frederica stiffened her expression. She adjusted the hem of her skirt, which she had rolled up slightly to check her foot, and looked in the direction where the voice had come from. Thereupon was a tall, strong, wild-looking man with dark blonde, slicked-back hair. He stroked his well-groomed beard around his mouth with his fingers and smiled, baring his sharp teeth. Stranger. Sometimes instead of leaving it up to others, you gotta stretch your legs yourself. Right, Frederica. You are a very ill-mannered gentleman. If you ask me to agree with you, I have nothing to say to you. Stranger. What a very elegant way to speak. Ah, I know. The first thing you do is embellish where you can be seen and heard, a rudimentary means of disguising yourself. Frederica could not ignore the man's friendly attitude as he approached her. The reason was because some of the man's words were on point. The first thing she learned when she left the forest was how she spoke and appeared. Frederica, just who are you? Stranger, me, I'm Hayden Garrow. Frederica, Hayden. I know, it's not my name you want to hear. Right. But then again, even if I didn't, I'm sure your blood does, kinsman. The man added so with a laugh and grin. Frederica fell silent at the last part of Hayden Garrow's words. When Frederica was informed of the man's identity, she knew what he was. Frederica, so you are half-beast just like me. Hayden, quite rare, ain't it, to run into someone else like you outside of your own hometown. We're the kind of creatures who cannot even recognize each other if it weren't for something else. Frederica, I dislike being lumped in with you with how you say creatures. Unable to regain her elegant expression, Frederica only refuted Hayden's way of speaking. Half-beasts were beastmen with more human-like characteristics than other demi-human species. Despite their physical abilities and beastman-like characteristics, they were almost indistinguishable from the human race in their normal appearance. Frederica and Garfield were also indistinguishable from others, apart from their fangs. And it was the same for Hayden in front of her. Frederica, you have fewer distinctive features than we do. Hayden, yeah, I've got sharp fangs, that's all. And the rest is the sex appeal overflowing from my entire body that attracts females. Frederica, in the roughly 20 years since I was born, I never knew I was not a woman. Hayden, you're saying that, but hey, I think I like you. When Frederica turned her head away from Hayden's poor character, he was in a good mood for some reason. He stood in front of Frederica and pulled her shoulders up to him. Frederica, still with one boot off, was unexpectedly held close to his chest. Frederica, hick, how rude, let go of me. Hayden, you're really tall when you stand up. You got nice breasts and a shapely waist. You're a woman I'm liking more and more. Frederica, you. Her anger peaked at the scrutinizing gaze, and Frederica's hand mercilessly slapped Hayden's cheek. Hayden turned his head away as if his neck had been snapped, and as he slowly turned his head back, Hayden, I like your strong spirit. I'll take you as my future queen. Frederica, what are, Hayden? The future queen of the country I'm building must be a strong and beautiful female. With that, the color of Hayden's eyes turned bright red. Frederica felt the hairs on her body stand on end, and she almost instinctively turned into a beast. It was not the sex appeal that Hayden spoke of, but a sense of danger in response to a threat that appealed to the instincts of all living things, stranger. Get away from sis, you fucking bastard. Immediately afterwards, instead of the frozen Frederica, a powerful arm was unleashed on the detestable man. It was a youthful indiscretion, a blow not tempered with the slightest restraint. Garfield, who had no experience in the outside world, did not hesitate to deliver a blow that would have turned an ordinary man into minced meat. Even if it was to protect Frederica, it would be a serious matter if the other person died. The date would be ruined, and Garfield's reluctance to go out in the outside world would accelerate. However, that did not happen. Hayden, oh, you're a feisty brat. If it weren't me, that would have been dangerous. Saying that, Hayden grinned through his teeth as he waved his arm. He was forced backwards from his original position, and Frederica escaped from his arms and was now in Garfield's arms. At Frederica's sudden gasp, Garfield wrinkled his nose at his sister, Garfield. Sis, what's with that grinnin' bastard? You've got terrible taste in men. Frederica, gee Garf, I do not want to hear that from you. No, it is thoughtless to try to compare Ram with this person. I apologize, and thank you, Garfield. I ain't sure what you mean, but for now, let's put that aside. Garfield glared at Hayden, his eyes growing even sharper. In his wariness, Hayden clapped his hands in front of his chest, making a dry sound, and said, Hayden, you're also a half-beast, but from what I can tell, you have ordinary blood. Are you really that woman's brother? Garfield, talkin' 'bout ordinary when my amazin' self is here. You can't be thinkin' the reason why my amazin' self and Sis are blood relatives is because of our height, can ya? If that's the case, it's Sis's fault. Hayden, ha 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 ha, no, it's like I said. You got ordinary blood. As Hayden said this, he glared at Garfield, and suddenly his wrist gushed blood. The ensuing hemorrhaging caused Frederica to shout, Garf! However, Garfield, with a calm expression on his face, held the wound and cast his healing magic, Garfield. Nothing to worry about, sis. It ain't a big deal. I just got caught on the bastard when I punched him. Calmly, Garfield licked the healed wound with his tongue. However, his whole body was overflowing with a fiery, fighting spirit, and his anger at Hayden for offending his sister and attacking him was enough. Hayden seemed to sense this and shook his head, saying, Oi, Hayden. Oh man, I was just saying hello. I didn't mean to start a fight. Garfield, don't say something so pathetic after all that. Stay and have fun with my amazin' self till you get your nose smashed in. Sundown is Dilding's start, isn't it? Hayden, if it's all the same to you, I'd rather be asked out by your sister. So, Hayden spoke flippantly and snapped the fingers of both hands. For a moment, Frederica and Garfield grimaced at the fact that nothing happened, but then, just after, Hayden chuckled at their combined reaction. Suddenly, there had been a roar from the factory behind them, and the screams of the staff were heard. Garfield, hick, what the? Hayden, well, what is it? You'll never know if you keep staring at me. Hayden scoffed at Garfield's reaction to the unusual situation at the factory. Angered by Hayden's behavior, Frederica yelled, you. However, Hayden took a big leap backward, and Hayden, see ya. We'll meet again, my future queen. The figure disappeared from Frederica's sight after uttering a self-serving, hair-raising statement. The scent of self-confidence he wore also faded away. It seemed he was not lying when he retreated. As soon as Frederica's nose detected this, she called out Garf to her brother. Garfield, oh, I got it! Before she could say anything, quickly, Garfield's howling body rushed into the factory, and Frederica hurried after her brother to see what was causing the commotion at the Magic Creation tool factory. And then she saw it. One of the Magic Creation tools was running amok, covered in a sparkling light. Frederica, that is... Doubting her eyes, Frederica was surrounded by a green and yellow glow from the Magic Creation tool for pressing metal. It was a Magic Creation tool, which was used to mold metal between two steel plates, one above and one below the material. This was a relatively common sight in Costal, but she had never seen one that shined so brilliantly. And even more so, the sight of it moving autonomously and trying to destroy humans and other Magic Creation tools. Frederica, this is not good. For a moment, Frederica was shocked, then, kicking off the ground, she saved a worker who was on the verge of being pinned under a piece of material knocked down by the rampaging Magic Creation tool, barely preventing the damage from spreading. And then, before anyone else could get caught up in it, Garfield, quit your actin', up and bane all sparkly. The two arms of the howling Garfield were driven forcefully into the structure of the Magic Creation tool, breaking and splitting it apart as they twist between the steel plates that moved up and down. The decisive sound of steel being torn to shreds echoed through the air. And as the built-in magic stone cracked and mana erupted from the impact, light surged forth from it. It moved like a winged insect drawn to a fire, all concentrated in one place. Garfield, turn the fuck off! A moment later, a fist slammed into the magic stone that was attracting the light, and it shattered with a high-pitched sound. When the magic stone, a crystal of dense mana, shattered, its fragments scattered into the air as mana dust, and the light that caused the magic creation tool to go haywire also disappeared with it. There was nothing left behind, not even a trace of the light that had wrapped the magic creation tool. Frederica, Garf, you did a great job. Thanks to you, no one was injured. Garfield, yeah, looks like it, but... Frederica, after giving Garfield a pat on the shoulder for stopping the damage, Frederica raised an eyebrow at her brother's somewhat despondent voice. Frederica wondered why he sounded so subdued, and he said, Garfield, it was a huge, cool magic creation tool, but then it got brutally destroyed. The big, angular thing lover said, looking down with sadness at the broken magic creation tool. For stranger, I looked into the situation. It is consistent with the testimony of the staff. Their well-being is irreplaceable. You are not responsible for the damage to the factory's equipment. Frederica, thank you for saying that. Are you sure you are not upset? Stranger, puzzling, why have such a need for validation? When Frederica received a questioning look, she declined to answer, reluctantly saying, no. Although Frederica knew it was impolite to stare at someone's face, this man's expression did not change even once from the moment Frederica and Garfield entered the room until the end of them telling the story of what had happened. It was a quality of a politician not to let one's expression be read, but the mayor of Costul, Leno Rex, was too thorough. Currently, Frederica and Garfield had interrupted their date to visit the industrial city's city hall to report on the unusual events that had occurred at the Magic Creation Tool factory. She had just finished reporting the incident that took place there and explained the circumstances surrounding the destruction of the Magic Creation Tool. It was a very strange event. After all, the light that surrounded the Magic Creation Tool was... Leno, they are called light bugs in this city. Garfield, oh, you knew it had a name, Pops, ouch. Frederica, do not be disrespectful. My apologies, Mayor. My brother has only recently moved from the countryside and has difficulty speaking. Leno, no matter. I value the ability to save the people of the city more than etiquette. Garfield, oh, Pops, you're bane, sensible, Arantia. Sis worries too much, ouch. Frederica sighed as she pinched the unrepentant Garfield in the side. Then, to resume the interrupted topic, she prefaced it with a so, Frederica. You mentioned light bugs. What are they? Leno, they are a phenomenon unique to this city, so to speak. They have had many sightings near factories that use magic creation tools, and it has been confirmed that they are attuned to magic stones. It is speculated that magic stones, which are used to power the magic creation tool and the mana residue from the magic stones, may have bonded with some kind of micro-spirits. Frederica, indeed, that light certainly gave the impression that it might have been closer to a micro-spirit. Frederica nodded quietly, finding Leno's speculation convincing. Since Emilia, a spiritual arts user, lived in the mansion, she routinely interacted with the micro-spirits around her every morning and evening. Frederica had many opportunities to see this. The appearance of the micro-spirits flying around Emilia seemed to be similar to that of the light bugs in the city. But Garfield, it's a lil dangerous for Lightbug to be doing such mischief, isn't it? Leno, in fact, this is a new problem that Costul has had in recent months. Frederica, a new problem, is it? No matter the city-specific nature of the phenomenon, its dangers were just as Frederica and Garfield had witnessed earlier. However, Leno said it was not an old problem, but one that had arisen in the last few months. At Frederica's and Garfield's glances, Leno tucked in his chin in a small way, and Leno. As mentioned previously, the Lightbug's presence has been confirmed in the city for some time. However, there was a consensus that they were harmless, as they were only seen alongside the magic creation tools. In recent months, the magic creation tools have been observed to be malfunctioning and behaving abnormally, and there have been reports of the Lightbugs' unusual behavior as well. Frederica, Then, the light bug was causing the magic creation tool to behave abnormally. Leno, it was being verified, but what you witnessed confirms it. When Leno replied, he shook his chiseled face with thin eyebrows gently to the side. Leno, while it would have been preferable if we could have dealt with the problem within the city, however, the priority of dealing with the damage is more important than determining the cause of the problem. I will be requesting assistance from Margrave Mathers as soon as possible. Garfield, why do ya need that bastard Roswell's help? Frederica, Garf, this city is part of the Master's territory as the Margrave of the West. It is only natural for a lord to address any problems that arise in his domain. As she explained the situation to Garfield, Frederica was impressed by Leno's sound judgment. It had been the right decision for the mayor to try to resolve the situation internally and turn to the Lord immediately if he found it difficult to do so. And if the person he relied on were Roswell, the decision would be sound. There was no one better than Roswell when it came to managing the affairs of a lord, as long as he was not being devious. Frederica, so I understand that you dislike the master, but, Garfield, that ain't it. My amazin' self not lickin', the bastard and what I'm sayin', now are two different things. Surely you know that, sis. I'm talkin' about the bastard who made Lightbug or whatever it was go nuts. Frederica, that Lightbug was made to misbehave. Oh. Frederica's emerald green eyes blinked in surprise when Garfield frowned at her. She was so preoccupied with reporting about the magic creation tool going haywire at the factory, and the light bug that caused it, that she missed Garfield's point about the rude man, Hayden Garrow, just prior to the incident. Naturally, Leno, who had never heard of this before, responded with, "What do you mean?" Leno, do you have an idea what caused the light bug to cause the magic creation tool to go out of control? Frederica, why, yes. However, we are not sure of the exact method. Garfield, I know the bastard that did it. He's a big, ugly half-beast. As soon as the bastard snapped his fingers, it caused the commotion at the factory. He's got the light bugs under his control somehow. It's like the giant rat dancing to Dakost's flute. Leno, I find that difficult to believe at this point. From Leno's point of view, he had been handed information that was beyond common sense. Frederica called out to him, Mayor, despite the fact that he did not change his facial expression, but only changed his tone of voice. Frederica, earlier, you speculated that the light bugs are similar to micro-spirits. If so, a spiritual arts user should be able to communicate with a micro-spirit and make a contract with them to use them. Leno, it would not be surprising if there were someone who could communicate with light bugs and manipulate their workings, yes. Leno was receptive to Frederica's speculation, and he arrived at the same concern. Even though the specific nature and identity of light bugs were unknown, if the possibility surfaced, it could be considered by following the precedent. There was a good chance that the man Hayden had been controlling the light bug. Frederica, in addition to consulting with the master about how to deal with the light bugs, I think we should also follow that man, Hayden Garrow. I do not mean to be presumptuous, but my brother and I can track him down using our noses to some extent. Leno, well, the Margrave is the demi-human lover. Frederica, I would like to deny that moniker for the sake of the master's honor, but Frederica was somewhat uncomfortable being convinced by the misguided assessment of Roswell because she had better senses than the average person. Regardless, it seemed that Leno had given due consideration to the abilities of Frederica and Garfield and the possibility of Hayden Garrow's involvement in the incident. Frederica, let us move quickly, Garf. Unfortunately, our date today ends here, Garfield. Frederica, Garf! When there was no response to her call, Frederica turned to Garfield and addressed him. However, her brother did not respond and remained still, his gaze fixed on the window of the room. And then, when the silent Garfield snorted weakly, Garfield, get down. Immediately after, Garfield's outstretched arm grabbed Frederica and Leno's clothes and pulled them down. Frederica almost screamed as she was pulled down forcefully to the ground. No, she may have actually screamed, but no one, not even herself, heard it. The next moment, something crashed with great force into the wall of the top floor of City Hall. Frederica, tossed by an impact that seemed to turn the world upside down, the room's desks, shelves, and sofa on which Frederica and the others were sitting were blown away. and collected at the far end of the room. Among all of it, Frederica and the others had also been tossed to the far end of the room. There, they sat up, looked at the wall to see what had happened, and were stunned. There was a large hole in the wall, through which one could see a panoramic view of the industrial city. Moreover, in that panoramic view, a huge construction magicreation tool was clad in a pale light. The magicreation tool, a type of beast carriage with a ladder for transporting construction materials to high places, crashed into the city hall at a tremendous speed while carrying a large amount of building materials. Of course, this could not be a natural phenomenon, Garfield. That bastard set this up. When Garfield had sensed the attack at the last minute, he howled, his fangs twitching in anger. The target of his anger would be the unseen Hayden, but the venting of his rage would have to wait. The slowly descending magicreation tool for working at heights approached, accelerating once more. There was no telling if City Hall would collapse if that thing hit it again. Frederica, Leno-sama, how many people are in City Hall? Leno, 12 people, including family members of staff. Leno understood the meaning of Frederica's question and answered it instantly. In response, Frederica sharply shouted, calling Garf to her brother. Frederica, please break a hole in the floor, I am going out. Garfield, don't screw up, sis. Garfield barked and instantly stomped the floor, and at the same time, Frederica jumped to Leno, dropped to one knee, picked him up by his large frame, and pushed him back against the window opposite the side where the magicreation tool was closing in. With a high-pitched crash, Frederica smashed through the window and escaped out of the building with Leno. Leno. Even in this predicament, Leno's tenacity to not let out a single scream was remarkable. City Hall was a 6-story building with the mayor's office on the top floor. Frederica could have easily landed at this height if she were alone. However, with a person in her arms, even she could not land easily, and an ordinary person would fall to their death. Kicking the exterior wall to kill their momentum, Frederica, while holding Leno, managed to land on the ground, just as the magicreation tool struck for a second time, shaking City Hall, causing the building to tilt with a roar. Frederica, Garf, the back of the building! Frederica shouted aloud, forgetting her modesty in the moment. Her voice had to be heard by Garfield over the thunderous roar. The results were immediate. Windows from the 5th floor down of City Hall were shattered in a single motion, and the staff inside were thrown out one by one. The staff, their faces turning pale, panic-stricken in midair, landed over the heads of Frederica and Leno into the reservoir behind the City Hall behind them. Leno, someone lend some assistance. I'm going to rescue those who fell into the water. After hearing the continuous sounds of water, Leno, having left Frederica's arms, immediately gave instructions. Immediately, people who heard the noise gathered together, rushing in, panting for breath, and began rescuing the employees who had been thrown into the reservoir. Meanwhile, the collapse of City Hall continued. Frederica, the magicreation tool. It had to be stopped. Frederica ran and grabbed onto the magicreation tool, which had lowered for the 3rd time to get into position. Jumping onto the beast carriage with a long vertical passenger compartment, she saw the light bug up close, as it forced the magicreation tool to move, which it was not supposed to be able to. It looked more and more like a micro-spirit, and Frederica's fangs clicked as she destroyed the magic stone that was embedded as the power source, cracking the magic stone inside and causing the light bug to dissipate. Instantly, as if it had died, the magicreation tool's suspicious behavior stopped. Upon seeing this, Frederica leaned out of the magicreation tool and looked at City Hall, Garfield. Bah! City Hall collapsed even without further damage, and Garfield burst through the plume of the rising smoke. With one person in his right hand, one in his left, one on his back, and one in his mouth. Together with the 8 staff members who were thrown into the water, this was all 12 people Leno indicated. Frederica, Garf, grew up strong. A feeling of relief spread slowly through Frederica's mind as she patted her chest in relief. Of course, Garfield's abilities were duly seen the night they were reunited, when he rescued Frederica from the clutches of an assassin. But that was not exactly the case. Not only did her brother have the power to fight someone, but he also had the power to save someone. Frederica, grandmother, you really did a great job raising Garf. A sense of pride filled her heart with gratitude for how her little brother had grown up and for Ryuzu for raising him so well. With that firmly in mind, she decided to join up with Garfield and the others, stranger. Oh, that's quite the accomplishment. It's amazing that you didn't let a single inferior get killed. Suddenly, at that whisper in her ear, Frederica's entire body swelled all at once. The clothes Petra had chosen swelled as Frederica's arms, legs, and torso threatened to tear them from the inside out, while golden fur threatened to cover her white skin. However, the man who appeared, Hayden Garrow, was faster with his strike. Hayden, my future queen, if you're going to undress, I should do it with my own hands in the bedroom. Hayden's fist, delivered with a vicious remark, pierced Frederica's midsection. Frederica cried out in pain, and her knees went weak as the impact went through her spine and shook her insides. Her body crumpled, then was humiliatingly supported by Hayden as her consciousness faded away. With that done to Frederica, Hayden, my plans have gone a little awry, but it can't be helped if I'm to welcome my future queen. Now, with your blood and mine, we shall exterminate the inferiors and build a new nation. The euphoric proclamation of Hayden was left unheard by Frederica. However, at the edge of her fading consciousness, Frederica could only think of one thing, the strong sense of remorse she felt at being separated from Garfield once again. 5 Leno. Garfield Dono, are you all right? Are you injured, Garfield? Ach, pa, who do ya think my amazing self is? Don't worry. Well, I was afraid for a moment that I wouldn't be able to get everyone out in time. Garfield spat out the gravel in his mouth and replied to Leno, who ran up to him. Having finally set the 4 who escaped with him down on the ground and thanked him for getting them out, they were taken away for medical attention, and Garfield finally took a breath. Leno, my thanks to you as well. You did a fantastic job of getting everyone out. Garfield, I guess it's only natural that my amazing self can handle it. It looks like Sis also did well. Garfield snorted at a grateful Leno and looked at the magic creation tool, which had ceased to run amok. Beyond the debris of the collapsed building, there was a halted magic creation tool that had lost its light. And as Garfield moved to save lives, Frederica must have turned off the light bug that was causing the problem. No, the real cause was not the light bug, Garfield. It was Hayden Garrow, that fucking bastard. Leno, that person is connected to the light bug's outburst. This collapse is no coincidence, then. Garfield, after the trouble at the factory, he must have followed us. And when he found out we were talking to ya, he wanted to keep us quiet. And when Garfield thought that much, his eyes widened slightly. Leno asked Garfield, what is wrong? But he did not respond. With narrowed emerald eyes, Garfield turned around and stared at the stopped magic creation tool. There was no sign of Frederica anywhere around the magic creation tool. Garfield, that fucking bastard. Instantly, he knew that Hayden Garrow had kidnapped Frederica. The attack on City Hall was a diversion, and his true objective was Frederica. As a result, he was caught up in the enemy's schemes and was unable to protect Frederica. Leno, Garfield Dono, Miss Frederica couldn't have been. From Garfield's gaze and expression, Leno also understood what had happened to Frederica. With a yeah, Garfield answered his question with a nod of frustration. He painfully realized his own inadequacies, but would let himself be beaten down by them later. Garfield, my first priority is to get Sis back. Everything else is. He was about to leave the cleanup of City Hall to others, but things took a turn for the worse. Before Garfield could finish, a roar echoed in the distance. In a chain reaction, not once but 2 and 3 times, each from a different direction, one after the other. Garfield's eyes widened in shock, and he looked in the direction from which the sound had come. A plume of smoke rising upwards, perhaps fire. Whatever sign of disaster it was made all the hairs on his body stand on end. What conclusively revealed its nature was the pale light visible at the source of every sound. Shimmering, dangerous lights that accompanied the light bug-attached magic creation tools. New disasters caused by light bugs occurred simultaneously in various parts of the city. It seemed to be Hayden's plan to ridicule Garfield, now that his sister had been taken away from him. Garfield, you're kidding me. You gotta be fucking kidding me, Hayden Garrow. Garfield's vision turned red with rage, and he gathered strength in his legs. The ground cracked as he stepped on it, and the divine protection of earth spirits drew forth its energy in response to his anger. How great would it be if all that energy could be directed toward Hayden? How great would it be if he could get his sister back right after she was taken? With such a longing that made his heart crack, Garfield stepped forward. Instead of the road that led to his sister, his fangs creaked as he turned to the now raging light bugs. Sick stranger. The loss of the demi-human war is the primary reason why the inferiors have been allowed to prosper. Stranger. Stranger. I find it also aggravating that people are calling it Lugunica's civil war, as if everything outside of the kingdom's a sideshow. But there were countless sparks everywhere. There was room for the flames to spread so much further. As the man continued speaking in an endless stream of words, the sound of steel rubbing against steel could be heard in his hand. It was a harsh sound, the sound of a small file sharpening a sharp nail. Hayden Garrow, a man who meticulously filed his nails, finished filing the nails on his left 5 toes with a practiced hand. Hayden raised his well-groomed hand and peered through the gaps between his fingers. His theatrical manner caused Frederica to let out a long breath, and Frederica, do you mind? Hayden, yeah, what is it? Frederica, if this is going to take long, may I go to bed? I had a hard time sleeping last night. I was looking forward to today before this happened. Hayden, cuckoo, ha 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 ha. There was a momentary lull in Frederica's words, which was quickly filled with laughter. Hayden laughed with his mouth wide open. Frederica winced in disgust as she heard his laughter reverberate, her chained arms raising a lifeless sound. Hayden, oi, don't hurt yourself needlessly. Blemishes are unbefitting of a queen. Frederica, you knocked me out and then brought me here, now you dare do as you please. Hayden, I treated you gently. I took care not to put a scratch on you. Although I don't deny that I had to use a strong hit if I didn't want to make any mistakes. Having said that, Hayden walked up, grabbed Frederica by the chin, and made her look up. Glaring directly into Hayden's close-up face, Frederica's expression contorted in disgust. The sight of Frederica, having brought a smile to Hayden's well-groomed, bearded face, Hayden, you don't have to be submissive. A female who keeps her high spirits is worthy of my country. Frederica, country, 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 what exactly are you intending to do? Do not tell me you are seriously planning to establish your own country. Hayden, if I said yes, would you sneer at my dream? Frederica. Frederica kept quiet as Hayden asked, in a slightly hushed tone of voice. Of course, he was delusional, but if she thoughtlessly said it out loud, the hand on her chin would crush her careless mouth. She was convinced of this. At Frederica's silence, Hayden narrowed his eyes and said, Good girl, Hayden. Beautiful, headstrong, and discerning. These are the reasons other than blood why I can't take my eyes off you. Then, he took his hand off Frederica's chin and proceeded to run his fingers through her long blonde hair instead, kissing it as if he were truly in love with it. Though her disgust rose at the act, Frederica only turned her face away in order to express her mind, instead turning her attention beyond Hayden and to her surroundings. The place where Frederica was taken after being knocked out by Hayden. It was a rocky space where the air was cold, and the only light source was a weak, blue-white light. The heaviness and dampness of the air and the reverberation of sound made it clear that this was a place like the inside of a proper cave. Frederica was chained to a cold wall of rock and restrained in a standing position, but judging from the time she had been unconscious, she was not far from Costul. Stranger, Hayden Kun, how is the lass doing? Frederica. Hick. When Frederica looked around, her shoulders jumped at the sound of a sudden voice from a third party. Hayden's smile deepened as he let go of Frederica's hair, after she unconsciously reacted and made the chains clank. Then he turned around and greeted the figure slowly approaching behind him. Hayden. Oh, our future queen is in good condition, Doc. No matter how good the quality of her blood is, if she is weak and ugly, no one will be willing to worship her. Stranger. I was not asking about appearance. Do you think it's my nature to obsess over that? Hayden. Oi, don't be so demeaning. Sure, you're ugly, but the presence of ugly things highlights the presence of beautiful things. Besides, it's much better than being an inferior. Hayden shrugged his shoulders, and the person with whom he exchanged words slowly came into the light. It was a gray-haired man with a morbidly pale, scrawny, skin and bones body. His dry skin and lifeless hair gave an eerie impression of a moving corpse, but this impression was belied by his eyes that held a glistening, sinister gleam. Both by intuition and by Frederica's rule of thumb, people with that look in their eyes were not sane. And sure enough, as the man stood in front of the strung-up Frederica, his eyes shone brighter and brighter, stranger. But I understand your feelings, Hayden-kun. At last, another bearer of the lovely, rare blood has appeared before my eyes. Frederica. Rare blood. Frederica reflected on the man's words, his voice betraying his excitement. She was not reflecting on what was said, because she had absolutely no idea what was being said. It was just the opposite. Frederica knew of rare blood, and she had been aware that she possessed it. She also knew that the special blood that flowed within her was partly the reason she was allowed to serve outside the sanctuary and taken in by Roswell. Stranger. Of course, you are aware of your own blood, aren't you? That your own blood is special and different from the blood of others. Its mana content, taste, and effects are different when consumed by a blood-sucking kind. Did you know that? If you take other people's blood, it becomes poison, but rare blood is not like that. It's mysterious blood. Frederica, I was not aware of that. Some of that information I did not want to know. With no offense meant to the insistent man, she did not want to imagine the possibility of someone consuming her blood. Even if they said it tasted good and was full of power, she would not necessarily be happy about it. Of course, Frederica was grateful for her mother, who gave birth to her as she was, and although she had mixed feelings about her father, who had made her mother suffer, she was grateful for the chance to be born. It was also noted that Frederica's status as a half-beast was an important part of her destiny that she lived with. Ryuzu, Fu, don't curse your birth. Nothing would make us happier than for young Fu and Garbeau not to have to live with the regrets we have lived with for so long. Frederica recalled Ryuzu's words to her when the sanctuary was liberated and they were to live apart. To her words, Frederica replied, absolutely. Frederica. However, I was never told that I would be courted by these gentlemen, grandmother. Although she did not want to burden herself with her own birth or Ryuzu's words, she was indeed tempted to say that this situation may be too unfortunate. Stranger. Good, excellent, I've longed for this. It's my long-awaited moment. You two are my. While Frederica's thoughts wandered, the man's eyes became all the more erratic. With fingers as thin as dead twigs, he pulled open the front of his cloak, exposing what was underneath. At first, Frederica almost screamed at the unpleasant sight she imagined, but upon seeing what was actually under his cloak, her screams were subdued. There were countless vials filled with a reddish-black liquid hanging inside. Stranger. The blood samples of my soul. I am a researcher. My goal is to discover the hidden power of blood, unravel its mysteries, and thereby bring the world salvation. Frederica. The mysteries of blood and the salvation of the world. Stranger. That's right. To unravel the mysteries of blood is tantamount to unraveling the secrets of life. Therefore, your blood, lassie, will be a great help to move the world towards the future. The man approached Frederica, who was left speechless after having been told of his bizarre theory. At the man's approach, who was dominated by fiendish thoughts, Frederica felt an instinctive terror. However, Hayden, Doc, that's enough. I don't want you to intimidate my future queen any further. Of all things, it was Hayden who grabbed the man's face and saved the squirming Frederica. Hayden grabbed the man by the mouth, and the man let out a pained yelp. However, Hayden's expression hardened slightly as he tried to get the man to back down. Hayden, Tusk, Doc's got some sticky fingers, no, there's some sticky fangs. Stranger. Higher, it's wasteful. It's wasteful, Hayden-kun. Hayden clicked his tongue and let go. Blood dripped from the base of his thumb. Apparently, the man's teeth had hit him as he grabbed his face, which caused him to bleed. However, the man's behavior was unusual. When Hayden's blood dropped to the ground, the man fell onto his stomach and began to lick it up. Again, it was an unusual behavior that made Frederica want to scream, but she could see the man's mouth as he did so, and then it made sense to her. Frederica, those fangs and that behavior of blood-licking, a blood-sucking kind, you are a bat person, right? Frederica determined from the man's obsession with blood that this was the man's true identity. Then, looking at Hayden, she continued, and, Frederica, I see that you too have rare blood. Hayden, you really are a smart woman. It was worth taking the time to evaluate you, Frederica. Frederica. Hick, my name. Hayden. Of course, I know. You didn't really think I was just gonna say that a woman I saw on a whim was gonna be my future queen. That's the stuff of fairy tales and make-believe. Frederica felt humiliated, and at the same time understood that everything had been set up, as she was mocked by Hayden, who shrugged his shoulders, having said that today was no coincidence. Everything from her encounter with Hayden at the factory to the subsequent commotion and the collapse of City Hall. Frederica. So, all this commotion in Costul is because of my rare blood. Hayden. Oi, oi, don't talk as if your only value is in your blood. I'm interested in your body, too. Well, you're right. The real reason for all the commotion was ya. Frederica. How did you manage to manipulate the light bugs? Hayden. That's the result of the research of the blood sample collector, Doc Leonardo Baroness. He licked the wound on his hand and admired the accomplishments of the man he looked down at, the man he called Leonardo, who crawled at his feet. Hayden, I don't have a clue about it, but I've heard that some people in the world got a disposition that allows them to bring out the performance of magic stones better than others. And unlike a divine protection, the difference appears to reside in their blood. The doc extracted that element and was able to manipulate the light bugs, which are born out of the used magic stones. Leonardo. If I am to say it, calling it a bug is a rather ignorant statement. It is an entity that serves as a deterrent for the world, so as to punish those who distort its laws. Hayden. In short, they came to be because of the inferiors who created the magic creation tools. The people who created them in all of their hubris, getting attacked by the proof of their very sin. Delightful story, isn't it? Frederica, with such a short story, there were 2 or 3 things that struck a nerve with me. Frederica grew angry at both Leonardo, who was licking the ground, and Hayden, who was sneering at her. Hayden, who kept repeating inferiors, inferiors like a broken record, had already differed from Frederica in his ideology, calling himself a half-beast like Frederica and Garfield, and while apparently having some thoughts on the demi-human war and the kingdom of Lugunica. Frederica. Us and humans are not in a competition for superiority. We are not the same, but I do not think of them as differences. Hayden. Frederica. In fact, the human race made different discoveries from the demi-human races. Magic and tool-making skills, for example, even Costul's magic creation tools, are the results of their hard work. Hayden. Be quiet. Frederica tried to clearly state that she had a different opinion. Hayden brought his face close to the tip of Frederica's nose and spoke a short, clear command. The ominous energy that overflowed from his whole body immediately made Frederica's instincts shudder. It produced a more certain effect here than being grabbed by the chin and silenced by force. Frederica. Holding her breath, Frederica swallowed her words. At the sight of Frederica, Hayden's face turned serious, and after a pause he broke his expression with, Oi, oi. Hayden, my bad. I'm just annoyed that you're always talking out of turn. I like strong-willed women, but don't like ill-tempered ones. Frederica. What do you plan on doing to me after all? Having seen that Hayden seemed to regain his composure, Frederica gave up the idea of talking to him. Talking to someone unwilling to engage in discussion would only force a one-sided negative response. The only thing to do here was to look for an opportunity to escape, while playing the role the other party wanted in this situation. But Leonardo could not be allowed to drain all the blood out of her body before that. Hayden, no need to worry, I won't let you get hurt. Once we're ready to leave, we'll go to my castle for a while. Frederica, castle. Hayden, oh, you'll love it. Oi, Doc, how long are you going to keep licking the blood off the ground? I'm waiting for ya. Get this over with. After announcing his disheartening plan, Hayden grabbed Leonardo by the collar and made him stand up. Leonardo seemed to want to go back to the ground, but when Hayden kicked him on the butt and urged him to hurry up, he said, all right, and began to dismantle everything. Once that was done, it seemed that Frederica would be welcomed into Hayden's castle, Frederica. The strength of the chains was such that it was uncertain whether Frederica could break them even after transforming into a beast. Leaving that as a last resort, Frederica gathered her breath and waited for the opportune moment. Frederica, I will be certain to keep my promise to grandmother. Frederica remembered the promise she had made to Ryuzu, strengthening her resolve. Surely, Garfield must have been struggling to find Frederica by now. 7, and in the industrial city, Garfield struggled beyond Frederica's imagination. Garfield. Oh. Garfield kicked the street hard enough to leave footprints, and his body flew like an arrow into the light bug-clad magic creation tool, or rather, the light bug that was wielding the magic creation tool. The magic creation tool in the factory, and the one for elevated work that caused City Hall to collapse, could be said to have been rendered haywire by a light bug. But this, however, was at a whole different level. The magic creation tool, at its core, was designed to polish metal, but its function and structure were ignored by the light bug that clung to it, covering the entire thing and turning it into one gigantic monstrous light bug that rampaged about. Garfield's flying kick had pierced into the center of the monstrous light bug. There was resistance from the light for a moment, but the twist of his heels shattered it, smashing the magic creation tool itself. The magic stone at the core of the light bug formation shattered, and the entirety of the monstrous light bug also dissipated. Garfield. With this, having just destroyed his 10th monstrous light bug, Garfield was ready for a breather. However, Garfield was not allowed to rest on his laurels, as magic creation tools began to go haywire in other parts of the city in rapid succession, which spawned new monstrous light bugs and caused more and more damage. Garfield. Hick! Magic creation tools were the backbone of the manufacturing power of the industrial city of Costul. As such, they could be found throughout the city. Since the magic creation tools were triggered one after another by the light bugs, it was as if the sparks had been scattered throughout the city in advance. Garfield, shit, no matter how many times I smash 'em, they keep on coming. Garfield grit his teeth as the city guards also rushed around under Leno's command, but they were not entirely up to the task. Ultimately, it was a situation where Garfield's defenses were indispensable. Garfield. Sis! There was a slow-burning sensation in his heart, and Garfield's spirit was driven to the edge. He would like to rescue his distressed sister as soon as possible. But if Garfield were to leave an opening, what flowed through would wash away the fates of many people. If he devoted all his energy to prevent that, Frederica would grow further and further away. The inescapable conflict between the two was mercilessly chipping away at Garfield's inexperienced soul. Garfield. Bring it on, this ain't nothing. Despite the uneasiness in his heart, Garfield's body moved wildly. The moment the newly emerged monstrous light bug poked its head out, he accurately hit only the magic stone part of the magic creation tool with his fist, without any unnecessary moves. Right after, as if to get back at another monstrous light bug, which made a magic creation tool howl, somewhere else he jumped, hitting it with a spinning kick and silencing the next enemy as well. If he wanted to rush to his sister's side just 1 second sooner, he would have to silence as many monstrous light bugs as possible. To do so, he went for the location of the next light bug, Garfield. Just as he was about to leap out, Garfield felt a growing presence behind him on the nape of his neck. However, that was impossible. It was from where the first of the 2 light bugs that had just been destroyed in succession had appeared. Garfield's emerald green eyes widened as he turned around to see if there were any more of them. The monstrous light bug was supposed to have been defeated. However, its light surrounded 2 magic creation tools. By absorbing multiple magic creation tools, it had increased its critical points to 2, and he had failed to defeat one of them. One of them jerked wildly, and a part of the monstrous light bug's body began to glow intensely. He could see the mana concentrated at that one point, a sign that an attack was about to be unleashed beyond his reach. Garfield. Wait! He extended his hand and tried to jump to get in the way, but would not make it in time. Then, before Garfield's eyes, the monstrous light bug's attack was be unleashed to set the city ablaze, as if to ridicule Garfield's arrogance, stranger. Pardon the assistance. Just a moment. The moment he heard that voice, the body of the monstrous light bug that was about to release the light disappeared suddenly. The space where the monstrous light bug's body used to be literally disappeared, and the mana it had accumulated, and its bizarre body also disappeared. Naturally, the monstrous light bug's core, the magic creation tool, was gouged out. It could not maintain itself, and became particles of light that dissipated into thin air. Garfield. Wah! An extreme amount of confusion struck Garfield as he wondered what had happened. The confusion stopped Garfield in his tracks, and unhindered by his interference, malice was about to blossom elsewhere. But that, too, was stopped just in time. When the light bug, which was about to become massive using a magic creation tool as a catalyst, was frozen whole. Stranger, thank goodness. It looks like we made it in time. A flying figure landed nimbly right on top of the now frozen pillar that used to be the monstrous light bug. With long silver hair that danced in the air, it was a half-elf who patted her chest in relief, Emilia. Garfield's eyes widened at her appearance as a member of her camp and its leader. Garfield. Emilia, Sama, why are you here? Emilia, why? I was in the mansion when I heard a really loud noise coming from the city. There seemed to be a lot of smoke, so I rushed over. Garfield. Rushed over, Emilia. Yes, that's right. I'm sure everyone else is on their way too, but the first ones to get here were me and Stranger. It appears there is only me. Accompaniment. A calm voice overtook Emilia's words, and Garfield turned in a panic. Then his eyes met those of a composed-looking young man standing behind him. A thin, wire-like impression clad in a black butler's uniform with a monocle over his left eye. This person had taken care of them a month ago, before and after they moved into the current mansion. Garfield, I think you were at Roswell's relatives, the Lil Pipsqueak's place. Stranger, it is an honor to be remembered. As you said, I serve the young Anna Rose Sama. I am Clind. Reintroduction. Garfield, why are ya a third party even with Emilia Sama? Clind, I was just visiting the mansion on business and happened to come across this situation. Coincidence. So I joined Emilia Sama for support. Limited help. The young man politely bent at the waist and bowed. Garfield let out a ragged breath at Clind's words. If it was Clind who caused the strange phenomenon that erased the monstrous light bug just before, his help would be more than a little help. And it would not be a coincidence, but good luck. Then, Emilia jumped off the pillar of ice and landed beside Garfield, looking around the city. Emilia, are those strange little ones micro-spirits? No, not quite. Those little ones are the ones who are doing bad things to the city, aren't they? Garfield. Oh, yeah, apparently they're called light bugs. They're messin', round together with the magic creation tools in the city, but that's not all. As Garfield unconsciously answered Emilia's question, he raised his voice. Emilia's eyes widened in surprise at the force of the response. However, Garfield did not have time to apologize for surprising Emilia. Garfield. It's Sis. The city's in trouble, but Sis is in trouble too. Emilia. See, calm down, Garfield. What happened? You and Frederica were supposed to be on a date, weren't you? You're not together. Garfield. No, she isn't. She was taken away by the bastard who started all this trouble. Emilia. Frederica? Garfield, who had been struggling to smash every one of the monstrous light bugs that sprung up left and right, grew increasingly impatient, and was finally able to vent his frustration to a companion. Instantly, Clind's eyes narrowed sharply, and Emilia's eyes widened even more. Clind. Garfield Sama details, please, urgency. Garfield. While touring the city with Sis, some asshole got into a dispute with her. I don't understand how he did it, but he made the light bugs go berserk. Clind. Frederica was taken by him. Diversion. Garfield. Yeah, that's right. And 'cause I got stuck here, Sis. Garfield clenched his fists tightly and regretted his mistake. Just because City Hall had been destroyed was no excuse. Since he had seen Hayden's obsession with Frederica just prior, he should have suspected that his sister would be targeted. Emilia. Garfield. As Garfield expressed his regrets, Emilia stepped forward. And before Garfield could say anything, she clamped her hands tightly around his face. Emilia. Keep your head up. You saw what they looked like, didn't you? If so, you're the only one who can find the person who took Frederica, Garfield. Garfield. Emilia. Roswell is not at the mansion right now, so I'll make the decision. Go search for Frederica. No, it's Garfield's duty to get her back. Do your best. Emilia said this to Garfield directly, putting pressure on her slender fingers. Garfield was taken aback for a moment, but then his voice shook as he said, wait a minute. Garfield. If my amazing self leaves here, the city and all the people who live here will be. Emilia. We'll take care of that. You don't have to do everything alone. We're all in this together. Garfield. Ah! Garfield was stunned by Emilia's words. It was okay not to do everything alone. That was why Garfield was defeated by Subaru just a month ago, and why Subaru, with the help of Ram and Otto, defeated Garfield and recruited him to their side. However, it was an idea that Garfield, who raged alone in the sanctuary for so long, had never even conceived of, and so he found himself unable to breathe. Clind. Emilia-sama, may I also accompany Garfield-sama? Proposition. Emilia, Clind-san also. Garfield aside, Emilia was surprised at Clind's proposition. Clind. Yes. Considering the cause of Frederica's kidnapping, it is likely urgent. More to the point, if what caused this situation is who took Frederica. Emilia. If that bad guy is defeated, all the dangers in the city will be solved. Clind. So, I foolishly believe. Appeal. Emilia's eyes grew intense, and she pointed at Clind's bowed head with a finger. Emilia. Yes, let's do that. I'll deal with the city while Garfield and Clind-san go and get Frederica back. Garfield. But if it's just you alone, Emilia-sama, you don't have much of a chance. Emilia. That's not true. Emilia, about to undertake the vigorous defense of the city, intensified her words at Garfield's concern, and matched the edge of her words with her hand turned towards the distance. Beyond the palm of her hand, Emilia watched as the newly born monstrous lightbug froze and became unable to move, and she turned to Garfield and Clind with a right. Clind. As long as there is a long range, the environment is more favorable to magic users, and I think Garfield-sama has his own strengths. Encouragement. Garfield. Being strong is my amazing self's strong suit. My strength will help find my sister. Wait a minute. The alternative of leaving her in charge of the city broadened Garfield's horizons. Specifically, there was something that Garfield had not noticed in the chaos of Costul with the emergence of the monstrous lightbugs. However, now that he had calmed down, there was something that certainly stimulated Garfield's sense of smell. Garfield. This way. With certainty, Garfield turned in the direction where Frederica would be. Emilia and Clind looked at each other and nodded. And then, Emilia. Go on, Subaru once told me. It's a date until you get back to the mansion. Garfield. Yes, leave it to me, Emilia-sama. Emilia saw him off, and Garfield dashed off with a few words to Emilia, who remained behind. For a moment, he almost thought he was going to leave Clind behind due to his powerful acceleration. Clind. No need for concern. Accompaniment. Slightly leant forward, Clind followed at a speed comparable to his. With that being the case, Garfield forgot his concern for him, put the chaos of the city out of his mind, and concentrated on getting to Frederica's location. Subaru, a belated appearance of the real star of the show. Kept you waiting, huh, Garfield? Now that Biko and I have rushed over, you can rest assured that everything will be safe and sound. Beatrice. Let's show off Betty and Subaru's partnership to the fullest, in fact. Don't blink and miss it, I suppose. And at the entrance to the city, Garfield passed a pair of voices like that, but those, too, were outside of his consciousness. Garfield left behind the two people exclaiming, "That's not right. And is there no limit to your rudeness, in fact?" At being ignored by him. For the first time in a month, he ran again to save his sister, just as he had done that night, savoring the joy of running with someone's affirmation that he was not doing it all alone. Stranger, if you don't try to escape, I won't do anything. I want to believe you, but what happens now? When asked by Hayden, his strong arms outstretched, Frederica gave a grimace and fell silent as best she could. The question came at the point when he was finally ready to take Frederica out once he had completed his preparations for leaving. It seems that if she did not resist, he would remove her chains in a gentlemanly manner. Frederica, there is nothing gentlemanly about keeping me tied up. Do what you want, but just be prepared. Hayden. Really prepared? Frederica, if you remove these chains, be prepared to have your face ripped off by my claws. Hayden. Oi, when you say it like that, I'm tempted to take them off, but I'd rather not hang out in this cave any longer. With that, Hayden cracked his knuckles. Would he beat Frederica, knock her out, and carry her out, as he did when he brought her here? At Hayden's threat, Leonardo's thin voice echoed, Hayden-kun. Leonardo. Her rare blood is very precious. Do not be too rough with it. Hayden, I don't need to be told, Doc, she's my future queen. I wouldn't hurt her. Leonardo, even if you have no intention of doing so, your strength of arms is beyond the reach of ordinary humans. In fact, in bringing her here, you probably wounded her. I can smell the rich scent of her blood. Hayden. What? At Leonardo's nervous words, the smile faded from Hayden's face. Seeing this reaction, Leonardo's cheeks hardened and he asked, What's wrong? Leonardo, I commended you on your strength. Your physical prowess is unparalleled. Hayden, no, that's not it. You said it smells like blood. Rare blood, that's not mine. Leonardo, why, yes, you're right. I would recognize your blood immediately. It's different, Rich. Leonardo was momentarily overwhelmed, but soon ecstasy filled his voice. When Hayden heard his reply, he turned around and looked at Frederica with his blue eyes. Seeing the flicker in his eyes, Frederica understood. She had been noticed. Wordlessly, Hayden closed the distance between him and Frederica. Just as quickly, Frederica leaped to her feet as Hayden approached defenselessly. Frederica, take this. Up to this point, she had never attempted to fight back and kicked with all her saved-up strength. It stuck into Hayden's side of the head so as to reap the arrogant man's consciousness, but it failed to do so. The kick was stopped by an upraised arm, and he brought her held leg in front of him. And then, Frederica, While holding onto her leg, Hayden forcefully tore off Frederica's clothing with his other hand. Frederica screamed as her shoulders and underwear were exposed, and Hayden looked at her white skin from top to bottom. Then, with a cruel expression on his face, he grabbed Frederica's face this time. Frederica's mouth was forced open by what Leonardo had described as an unparalleled physical strength. Looking into Frederica's mouth, Hayden snorted. Hayden, that's my future queen. You're clever, aren't ya? Smiling wickedly, Hayden's eyes caught the bite mark at the base of Frederica's tongue. At the moment of her kidnapping in Costul, Frederica gave herself a wound on her tongue, leaving a trail of her blood, dotting it until she was brought here. Hayden, Leonardo, let's get out of here. Some troublesome guys will be here soon, stranger. Those troublesome visitors are here. Pardon. Turning around as if he had been played, Hayden shouted to Leonardo. However, this was interrupted by a rather patronizing voice, which made Hayden's brutish face tense up. That was the kind of reaction one would expect if a person suddenly appeared out of nowhere in empty space, especially if the cave walls had been gouged out by an unknown force, creating an entrance that he did not know about. And then, a figure jumped in through the entrance, stranger. For the second time, get away from Sis, you small fry. With a powerful punch to Hayden's face, he was able to do what Frederica was unable to and take revenge for the humiliation she had been put through. 9. The phenomenon that Clint had caused could only be described as a profound mystery. It was already a profound mystery when he crushed the monstrous light bug as well as the very space it occupied. But it was also a profound mystery the way they arrived at their destination. But the moment he confirmed that his sister was at their destination, he forgot all about that profound mystery. The important thing was to get Frederica back. That was Garfield Tinsel's role. Garfield. He drove his fist into the face of the one he detested and slammed it straight into the wall behind him, sending him flying out the other side, crashing through the rock wall. The impact and plumes of smoke shook the entire cave. But it was not the strength of the cave that he was concerned about, but rather separating his sister from the enemy in front of him. To accomplish this, Garfield did not stop, even when he smashed through the wall. Instead, he broke through and through and through into the vast room beyond. Garfield. Hick! After a brief moment of being thrown through the air, his entire body was immersed in a vast expanse of water. After he kicked the bottom of the water and rose to the surface, he found himself in a dark lake, a place like an underground lake. Upon reaching the disguised entrance, he knew it was not a man-made cave, but was surprised to find such a large underground lake hidden inside. Hayden, you don't got the luxury of looking around, unselected blood. Garfield. Tusk. As Garfield emerged from the surface of that water, he took a claw strike to the shoulder, causing a spray of water to rise. He instantly turned his body, but inside the water his movements were dulled. Unable to dodge, the man's fingertips gouged out his shoulder, and blood spurted vigorously from the claw-shaped wound in his flesh. It was like the first exchange of blows in Costal, and that was despite Garfield's body being tough so as to not be easily ripped open, even by the claws of a beast. Garfield, you're proud of your claws, huh, you fucking bearded bastard. Hayden. Yes, I am. My prized claws can even cut through steel, you see. Sinners, traitors, and inferiors, these are the king's swords to behead them. Garfield. Don't go saying shit that makes no fucking sense. Garfield's fist roared as he yelled, and the surface of the lake was blown away as if an explosion had occurred. Even if the water killed its momentum, Garfield's well-trained arm was like a mortar. It had the power to smash the opposition, regardless of any half-baked obstacles. However, this was only the case when the opponent wasn't capable of making half-baked obstacles non-trivial. Hayden, does it feel different in the water? There's a big difference in how you move compared to when you're on the ground. Garfield's right arm broke through the surface of the water. Hayden dexterously handled it, laughed, and his arms flew mercilessly toward Garfield, who gnashed his teeth. He claimed to be able to cut through steel, and indeed, the sharpness cut through Garfield's skin, gouged out his flesh, and cracked his bones, causing the blood that flowed out to stain the underground lake reddish-black. Garfield's divine protection of earth spirits, as pointed out by Hayden, did not work underwater, and the wounds he sustained were faster than his healing magic, causing him to bleed profusely, dissolving his life force into the water. Garfield let out a bubbling cry of pain, and Hayden sneered at Garfield as he sank into the blood and water. Hayden, I'll give you credit for having the guts and familial love to come here, but you still have unselected blood. You can't beat me no matter how hard you try. Your sister will serve as my country's future queen, where the inferiors will be exterminated, so thankfully sink. Garfield. Inferiors? Hayden. They're vermin that infest the whole world, pretending to be the rulers of the land. There was once an opportunity. The demi-human war was just that, but its leaders were incompetent. I'll take over their roles. Even amid his bravado, his claws scraped away at the flesh of his body. With blood flowing and flesh taken, Garfield's weight may have been much lighter than before he left the mansion. Even so, it was an uncomfortable outing, or rather date. Ram. Do your best, Garf. Frederica has always been concerned for you, Garf. She is Ram's senior. Ram won't feel good if you make the wrong choices. Ram's words, spoken to him before his departure, filled his blood-starved body with vitality. Whatever Hayden's point was, it mattered not to Garfield. Garfield, you're pissin' me the fuck off. My amazing self is gonna beat the shit out of ya. That's it. Garfield's enthusiasm bubbled noiselessly as his face was immersed in the water. However, his determination lay within his fist. Garfield's lunging fist left behind a strip of blood, while Hayden calmly took his time to stop it. Hayden should have been able to avoid the blow as before, but he was caught off guard by the slow movement of his fist. Hayden's right arm caught the fist, and the bones from the palm to his elbow, where the fist struck him, were instantly shattered. Hayden let out a stunned wah, and his eyes widened as the other fist was thrust, this time into his lower jaw, launching the large man with slicked blonde hair and sending him flying into the cave's ceiling. Unable to stand firmly due to being underwater, and having used the impetus of his entire body to throw that strike, Garfield exhaled a long breath. There was no way he could do it again, even if he were asked to. Garfield. All the demi-human wore this, and selected blood or not, that, and other such headache-inducing things. Say to Amelia-sama, not my amazing self. The relationship between humans and demi-humans, the absurdity of the world that Hayden considered wrong, and the ideals he sought to correct, were all outside Garfield's expertise. Those kinds of ideas were for Amelia and Subaru to worry about. Garfield's role was to break down the obstacles that stood in the way of pursuing those ideals. Garfield. And that means ya. Hayden, are you saying a dumbass like ya, who doesn't understand a single thing I'm saying, is gonna break my fangs? Floating on the surface of the water, Garfield pointed a finger above his head at Hayden, who was impaled on the ceiling by the earlier blow. Hearing Garfield's caustic words, Hayden's expression turned angry, and he bared his teeth. His form, which had lost one of its sharp canine teeth, transformed and changed its shape with a tremendous sound. It was beastification. Hayden Garrow transformed into a great lion that rampaged on instinct. Seeing this, Garfield also strongly gnashed his fangs. Garfield, I don't care what the fuck you have to say. I've got to continue my date with Sis. And then, as Garfield howled, his whole body began to enlarge with a creaking sound. She was so ashamed that she wanted to chew up one of her files if she could. In order to sharpen her endlessly growing fangs, she could not do without a file as a necessity in her life. Sometimes, when she felt really down, she chewed a file very hard as a way of venting her feelings. And now, this was exactly the kind of moment she wanted to have a file. Because, stranger, you should put on this jacket. Your appearance is unsightly. Affront. With his voice, a jacket was softly draped over Frederica, her clothing having been torn off. His nonchalant consideration displeased her, but even more so she was displeased with herself for the relief she couldn't help but feel. Of course, that relief was largely due to Garfield, who rushed in and punched Hayden away. However, Frederica was not so childish as to say that his presence had nothing to do with it. Frederica, this is humiliating. Stranger, first of all, one would have expected a word of thanks. Perplexing. He turned his head and muttered reluctantly as he repositioned the monocle over his left eye. Clind, the versatile butler in the service of Anna Rose Mylode, from a branch of the Mathers family and a relative of Roswell, was always detestably cool. Leonardo, Hayden Kun, how did you find this place? Clind, should I say that it was siblingly love? To be exact, Garfield-sama picked up the clues in the blood that Frederica left behind with his sense of smell. Acuteness, nevertheless, Leonardo. Clind, from a glance, I see that you are also clad in a considerable scent of blood. Despite this, it was a failure to have not noticed her plan. Great negligence. Clind shook his head slowly, unable to hide his disappointment. That gesture made Frederica shudder as she recalled his thorough education when she was an inexperienced maid. That mental anguish had also hurt Leonardo now, hurting his pride. In his emaciated, pale face, Leonardo's sunken eyes went bloodshot with rage, as that anger set ablaze his researcher self in all of its bizarrerie. Leonardo, I won't let go. The woman of rare blood. Every drop of her blood is mine. Leonardo fell forward on the spot, frothing at the corners of his mouth, the insanity engulfing his eyes. Then, suddenly, with a chain of high-pitched sounds, the vials of blood specimens he had hanging from his body broke all at once. The slowly spreading blood made it seem as if Leonardo himself had been the victim of a horrific incident, if only for a brief moment. The spilled gore seeped into Leonardo's entire body, and thus soon after he groaned, Oh! The blood sample collector's flesh now enveloped in bubbles of blood and beginning to transform. And then, Clind, it always amazes me how impure the souls of those who harbor such infatuation for you are, dumbfounded. Frederica, that is something I deplore more than anyone else. Frederica's voice trembled at the sound of Clind's dismay, and so she cursed her dole yet again. It was tempting to curse him. For in front of her eyes that man, obsessed with her blood, dissolved into a mess of it, transmorphing himself into a reddish-black liquid monster. Leonardo. Glorp! Leonardo's emaciated, slender body was transformed into an enormous mass, incomparably larger than himself, even compared to the volume of blood in the vials he had hanging from his body. Moreover, even in such a state, Leonardo's obsession did not seem lost, as himself now turned into liquid blood began to inch toward Frederica. With every tremor of the liquid Leonardo's massive body, bubbles of blood floated up into the cave's cold air. When it hit the pale, luminous rock wall, it absorbed that area into the blood and assimilated it. Once it hit the ground, it returned to Leonardo's body, assimilating the ground as well. Frederica was horrified from the bottom of her heart at the sight of his gradually growing figure. Frederica. Clind, would you please do something? Clind, that ever-growing ambition is admirable in itself. It is a way of thinking that I do not possess. Envious. Frederica, Clind, nevertheless. Clind's eyes, which had been expressing a mysterious admiration for the approaching liquid Leonardo, sharpened. The eye behind his monocle glared at the blood clot, and Clind extended his hands in front of him. Then he clenched his hands tightly. Immediately after that, Leonardo, glorp! The position of the head of the liquid Leonardo was unknown, yet his groans changed. The reason became obvious. The massive body made of blood had been gouged out alongside the very space it occupied, and the impact pierced his entire body. Furthermore, it had not happened only once, as that burst occurred every time Clind opened and closed his hands. Clind's attacks, which were invisible and unexplainable, struck Leonardo each time his hand was clenched. Leonardo, glorp. Clind, oh my, admiration. The liquid Leonardo's size vanished faster than it could absorb its surroundings as he fought a defense-only battle. The researcher's delusions would not allow such helplessness, however. The liquid Leonardo's huge body trembled, and the next instant, a burst of sparkling light. A light bug rushed toward Clind and attempted to contain his outstretched arms. As long as his hands stopped opening and closing, Clind would have no way to unleash another attack. Clind, I am truly sorry. My hands are inconsequential. Mistake. Leonardo's massive body was gouged out in front of Clind, who bowed with his hands enveloped in the light bug. Leonardo, glor. As it was, Leonardo's transformed blood clot body had become riddled with holes like a moth-eaten piece of cloth, and one after another, the space his body had occupied was devoured and disappeared. He faded away and then, finally, vanished. Literally, not even a drop of blood was left behind, and the blood sample collector ceased to exist. Clind. Had it grown endlessly, it would have been a danger to the existence of the kingdom. Addressed. Frederica again gasped at the unfathomability of the situation, and then spun around to look at Clind, who maintained a composed expression as he put things into perspective in a few seconds. And Clind. Frederica, are you unharmed? Confirmation. Frederica. Why, yes, I am fine, as long as you remove these chains. As she spoke, she suddenly felt the chains binding her wrists disappear, and she was able to lower her arms. Unsure how, the chains seemed to have been erased in the same way as Leonardo was. No longer noting the method, Frederica hid her body with his jacket. Frederica. Well, thank you for this, I should not say that. Garf is. Clind. Please wait. While important as well, that cannot be carried out immediately. The priority is to confirm your well-being. Ill-prepared. Frederica. Gah, I know, and you do not need to tell me. Roughly speaking, why are you here? Clind. When I stopped by the mansion on business, I spotted the damage done to Kostul and ran to the scene with Emilia-sama. We heard that you had been kidnapped there, so we came here. Rushed. Frederica, you were worried about me. Clind. Of course, your rare blood being misused. Dilemma. Frederica's fangs trembled as Clind shook his head slowly and answered. Even though she had already been released from her restraints and Leonardo had been defeated, Frederica still felt even more humiliation and disgrace than before. She did not want to think about the reason for it. And there was Stranger. Yo, Monocle, are ya and sis safe? Frederica. Garf! Frederica heard a voice coming from the other side of the huge hole in the wall and rushed toward it. She watched as Garfield stepped over the hole and emerged, his whole body bloodied and battered. Frederica. Are you okay? There is so much blood. Garfield. Ah, don't worry, it's all my amazing self's blood. Frederica. That is why I am so worried. All these injuries. Frederica's eyes widened as she wiped her brother's bloodied body with her sleeve and checked his wounds. The wounds that had caused the massive blood loss were already almost gone from Garfield's body. He may have used healing magic, but that was a truly tremendous recovery power. Garfield. If my feet are on the ground, there's no way my amazing self can lose in a fist fight. Frederica. You really are a child. Frederica's shoulders relaxed when Garfield showed his white teeth and proudly boasted of his victory. In Frederica's eyes, Hayden Garrow was an incredibly powerful man, but Garfield was even more so. Her little brother was much more dependable than this rare blood of hers. Frederica, you are more precious to me than any special blood. Garfield. Oh, oi, Monocle, something's wrong. Sis said something weird. She's on some kinda crazy drug, ouch. Frederica. I swallowed my pride to say this. Do not tease me like that. Garfield. I'm not kiddin'. I'm worried 'bout ya. Frederica was indignant that she had been made fun of despite building up the courage to say something so embarrassing. But Garfield responded by saying something equally upsetting, and the siblings began to bicker with each other. Clind, I am pleased that you two siblings are so close, but a side note. Attention. Frederica, what is it? I was just telling Garf about his sister's dignity. Ah. Frederica looked back at Clind, who interrupted her, and Frederica's mouth dropped open. Garfield also grimaced when he saw Clind's arms, both of which were enveloped by light bugs. Clind, despite the defeat of the one pulling the strings, they still will not release. Handle. Garfield, I managed to deal with the magic creation tools by smashing the magic stone. Do ya want me to smash your odd or cut off your arms? Clind, please avoid that method. Plea. This being used to be manipulated by that researcher's blood. In that case, Frederica. Me. Her name was called and Frederica pointed to herself. Nodding his head at the gesture, Clind held out his light bug-covered arm. Clind, free my arms with your rare blood. Salvation. Frederica. With a gulp, Frederica looked alternately at Clind's arms and face. Truthfully, Roswell had told her from an early age about the nature of her rare blood, but she did not remember it ever being of any use or benefit to her. If the reason Roswell had taken an interest in her was her blood, that would be the only good thing she could count. There were many things that she detested, big and small, including today's events. Frederica. I hope this will be the second one. With that, Frederica placed her finger on her fang and slid it over the tip with a flick. Slowly, a drop of blood formed on the cut fingertip, and then it gently fell onto Clind's light bug-covered arms. The drop of blood hit the pale light produced by the light bug. Frederica, I release you from the bonds of the blood that binds you. Please be free. The moment that Frederica muttered, so as to carry out her will. The light intensified momentarily, and the light bugs that covered both of Clind's arms dispersed, scattered into the air, then disappearing. Garfield watched the scene and let out a gasp of astonishment. Garfield. No way, it's gonna take a lot of Sis's blood to stop everything in the city, isn't it? Clind. Rest assured. Frederica's rare blood has overridden the bonds the practitioner placed on them. Coercion. By now, the disturbances in Costal should have stopped. Speculation. Frederica. Speculation shall not suffice. Garf, that man who was the mastermind. Garfield, he's lodged in the fucking wall. We've got to drag him back to the city as soon as possible. As he said this, Garfield took Frederica's hand and cast healing magic on her cut fingertip, instantly healing the wound. Her cheeks relaxed at her brother's concern, and Frederica gently stroked her finger. Frederica. Occasionally, this blood of mine brings me good as well. Garfield. Huh, did you say something? Frederica. No, it is nothing. Come on, we should hurry. Any more of this sweltering blood smell around me will make my nose weird. Clind. Frederica turned around to thank Clind, and in her gaze, she saw that he checked the feeling of his arms while staring at Frederica. Frederica, breath caught in her throat at the sharpness of his gaze, asked, what is it? He shook his head gently to the side and said, nothing. Clind. Again, as I thought, seeing you grown up is a disappointment. Regret. Frederica. Which part of a person do you look at when you say that? You pervert. It was an outburst that made her lose all interest in thanking him for saving her life. 11 Frederica had been successfully retrieved, Clind had destroyed the enemy collaborator, and the only thing left was to apprehend the mastermind and complete the victory. But it was not to be. Garfield. Tusk, you stubborn bastard. In Garfield's view, there was a large depression in the ground at the edge of the underground lake. The aftermath of the fierce battle had left marks all over the place, and the ground depression was where the battle had ended. But Hayden Garrow, who was supposed to be defeated, sprawled out on the ground, was nowhere to be seen. When they clashed against each other, Garfield and Hayden had transformed into beasts, a great tiger and a great lion, and although bloodstains remained at the bottom of the crater, Hayden's figure was nowhere to be seen. Clind. He holds a dangerous thought process. We should put out an alert in the vicinity and search for his whereabouts. Expeditious. Clind reassures Garfield concerning the whereabouts of Hayden, whom he failed to subdue. He advised that Garfield must not feel discouraged. Of course, Garfield also regretted his lack of strength and attention. But more than that, Garfield, Next time, if he comes after Sis again, I'm gonna smash him again. Clind. Garfield, what? You're mackin' and overwhelmed by Wylov's eccentricities face. Clind. No, not as much as Wylov, but I was surprised. Impressed. Clind smiled at Garfield's reply as if he knew the late Wylov himself. That smile so very slight. Clind. A fresh soul with a promising future like a growing young tree is truly magnificent. Coveted. Garfield. That is a compliment I'm not that happy about. Whether it was Clind's way of encouragement or pure praise, feeling uncomfortable about such an evaluation was all but inevitable. While Garfield and Clind were talking, Frederica was also waiting for them at the cave entrance, and clasping the front of the jacket Clind gave her, she sighed. Frederica was told that after her disappearance, there had been an increase in the damage caused by the light bugs in Costul. Emilia, Subaru, and Beatrice had been sent out to prevent the damage. Everything was a reflection of her own immaturity, which made things worse. Frederica, if only I did not say what I said today, stranger. And then I just tried to do the same thing on a different day. I was after you know. Frederica. Hick. Shuddering, Frederica turned at the sound of the voice, flourishing her prowess. With an air crack, the other person grabbed Frederica's arm. The one to do it being a lionman, a barbarous smile worn by his face as he looked down on her. Frederica. Hayden Garrow. Hayden, I'm glad. Finally, I'm hearing my name come from your lips. Hayden spoke much, though his whole body was in tatters, and his high spirits were noticeably diminished. If one were to fight Garfield and lose, it would only be the natural outcome. Rather, it would be more crazy to have the guts to get back up and then try to take on Frederica again. Hayden, that's the big difference between us and the inferiors, the unbridgeable difference of superiority. Frederica, it is a difference, not superiority. Are you still intending to try? Hayden, of course, is what I'd like to say, but this is harsh. Your brother's of poor blood, but he's quite skilled. Still holding onto Frederica's left hand, Hayden shook his head slowly. If he were to take Frederica away or do anything to harm her, Garfield and the others would rush to her aid, and he would face certain defeat. So this was just Hayden Garrow's unwillingness to admit defeat. Hayden. Frederica, I'm backing off for today, but you and I will run into each other again, as long as you continue to play with the inferiors in that joke of a royal selection. Frederica, your right-hand man was beaten. Do you intend to do this until one of us perishes? Hayden, you don't understand. You don't know how many people out there share my vision. Bringing his face close to hers, Hayden told Frederica in a throaty, muddled voice. Instantly, Frederica reflexively swept the nails of her ungrasped right hand across Hayden's face. She thought he would avoid it. However, Hayden did not evade, and a claw mark was etched above his left eye. The fragrant, rare blood of the lionman stained Frederica's fingernails. And Hayden, I'll keep this scar as a token of my appreciation for your remembering my name. Frederica, unfortunately, as soon as I wash the blood off my hands, you will be forgotten as a bad memory. My apologies. Hayden, ha-ha. At Frederica's best bluster, Hayden laughed a throaty laugh and removed his hand. With that, the lionman leapt dramatically backward and slipped into the forest outside the cave, disappearing both from sight and from her senses. Frederica, a man despicable even as she let him free. For just as he mocked, the unpleasant certainty that she would meet him again struck Frederica harshly in her heart, the source of life that pumped rare blood throughout her body. 12 Clind. I will go to Costul first to report the news. I will also be in charge of the arrangements for the escaped lionman Hayden Garrow. Duty. Frederica. Why, yes, please. It is that. Clind. Frederica, you are overly concerned. Unfounded fear. Frederica. Huh. Clind. There is no way that the people you care about would not care about you. Often, those people do not even consider their efforts for others to trouble them. Fact. Frederica. Clind. It is regrettable to have been interrupted. However, it is still possible to find enjoyment. Ingenuity. Leaving those irritating words behind, Clind proceeded to the industrial city. If he was correct, the lightbug cataclysm that Costul had suffered should have ended when Frederica's rare blood broke what was binding it. It was annoying to her that he was so confident that this would actually be the case. Garfield. But when that guy talks like that, it feels like he's really in the right. Frederica, I understand. I do. That man has always been like that. He acts like he knows everything, always effortless, and no matter how hard I try, he always has that self-effacing look on his face. It is so aggravating, Garfield. I didn't say anything like that. Garfield held Frederica's shoulders as she leaned forward. Unconsciously, Frederica thought her brother to be a Clint hater as well, but seeing his reaction, she blushed and apologized, saying, I am sorry. Anyway, Clint had left, and Frederica and Garfield were once again alone together. Although Frederica's clothes had been torn off, and she was hiding her exposed skin under Clint's jacket, with Garfield's upper body was also naked due to his beastification, him being in a horrific state due to the blood that had not been fully wiped away. It was hard to believe that it had only been a few hours since they left the mansion for their date. Frederica, you know what? Garfield, what is it? She did not want the silence to continue, but as soon as she tried to string a conversation, her speech was overtaken. Frederica and Garfield's eyes widened. They looked at each other for a while, then smiled softly. It was a ridiculously difficult situation, and the whole thing was not fully resolved. Frederica, I am sure you and I are safe for now, Garfield. And the people in the city are safe, I think. I ignored 'em, but the captain and the others were there too. Frederica, that is right, Garf. Perhaps you were a little bit dressed up when we left the mansion. Garfield, Gah! Garfield's cheeks hardened, and he grunted at Frederica's question as she tilted her head. Garfield turned his head in a motion that seemed like it would make a sound, and his reaction said it hit the mark. Frederica, I am glad you were well prepared to go out with me. Garfield, es so annoying. I had no choice but to do it 'cause Ram told me to. Even though you're the one who went to the trouble of gettin' all dressed up, isn't that pipsqueak maid gonna complain about it? Frederica, do not worry. Petra would not scold me. I am sure it will be you, Garf, who she will be angry with instead of me. Garfield, why's that? Without overthinking, the siblings continued their conversation just like they always did. The date to close the gap of more than 10 years did not go as planned, and many people got involved, and things got very serious. However, Garfield, well, it's that you know, sis. Frederica, I do not understand what you mean by that. Tell me what that is. Garfield, I got beaten up by the captain and came out to help Emilia Sama with the royal selection. But now I see that there are also bastards like that bearded freak out there. Frederica, Garf, venturing outside of the sanctuary, and for the first time, having encountered someone with values completely different from his own, despite their common circumstances, Garfield's words weighed heavily on Frederica. However, Frederica's momentary apprehension was dispelled by Garfield's continuing smile. Garfield, my amazing self can feel the meaning of common out of the sanctuary. I'm doing this so that these misguided bastards don't get in the way of Emilia Sama and the captain's plans. Frederica, hee. Garfield, huh? To Garfield, who clenched his fists and gave such a simplistic answer, Frederica laughed, half in bemusement and the other half in endearment. Garfield raised his brow at his sister's smile and snorted with a curious look on his face. As if that awkwardness was never even there, Frederica and Garfield enjoyed their date side by side. In the distance, they could see the industrial city, where people were calling out to each other and cleaning up the situation that had been brought under control. In the midst of it all, Emilia, who had noticed the two of them, waved her hand in a wide gesture. Looking at Subaru with Beatrice on his shoulders and Clint, having arrived earlier, Frederica and Garfield also looked at each other and waved back, big and wide, the siblings getting along well with each other. And